Hello everyone. In part one of this talk, I looked at the remarkable political instincts of the British and showed how our political savvy is highly tuned for keeping our politicians in check. I contrasted this with our almost complete political blindness with regards to the EU, which allows things to take place there that we would never accept here. So in part two of this talk, I ask, how did the British develop such keen sense of self-government? Where did it come from? And why might it be incompatible with continued membership of the European Union? Our democracy is rooted in prehistory. When the Romans came to Britain, they found a well-organised, proud and independent people, with great skills in crafts and with a well-developed system of laws. By the way, the image is from a children's magazine from the 1960s called Look and Learn. When did we stop teaching this stuff to our children, I wonder? Although these laws were unwritten, their legendary status was recorded in later years. They included the right of queens to reign, a very forward-thinking idea that would take hundreds of years to establish in Europe, and a right to own private property, along with a respect for individual liberty. Their governing assemblies, known in Anglo Saxon as folkmoot or folk meetings, were an early precursor of modern parliaments, made up of the free people of the community, presided over by law speakers. Local custom formed the basis of the unwritten law. What exactly those laws were is not known, but somehow the original laws of Britain, lost in the mist of time, were universally admired by later writers, and led to the recognition of the law of the land, something unknown on the continent, who developed a system of top-down Roman law. The law of the land was bottom-up, preceding and informing the written laws that followed, and, uniquely in England, became a powerful guiding force throughout the centuries right up to the present day. The law of the land was seen as part of England itself, arising from the customs and traditions of her people, not the arbitrary imposition of lords and kings. The law of the land survived the Romans, reasserting itself after they left, and miraculously triumphed again and again in the face of tyranny, right through to the present day. King Alfred the Great, the first King of England, an Anglo Saxon, is famous for creating common law. Alfred sent ministers to all parts of the kingdom to record the laws and customs in use in each place, and from this distilled out a set of common laws that could be applied throughout the kingdom. There was a strong focus on justice, rights, and honesty. Alfred was actively involved in examining the decisions of his judges and ministers, and would remove them from office if they did not act with justice. Along with law, he instituted an administration based on the written record, and insisted on all his ministers learning to read and write. It's not for nothing that Alfred is considered the greatest English monarch. With the Norman invasion, a second tyranny befell the English. William the Conqueror imposed a set of laws to control his newly conquered people. These laws were wholly foreign and inimical to the English way, and it would take hundreds of years before the Norman yoke would be cast aside. But throughout Norman rule, local common law councils were still used to deal with local issues, so common law survived, and over the ensuing centuries the Norman barons came to appreciate some of their strengths, especially the idea that the king should not be given arbitrary power. As an aside, one of the little-known laws that William introduced was that no man be allowed to sell another man. Anyone breaking this law will pay a fine to the king. Effectively, it was a ban on slavery that meant there would be no slaves on British soil from that time forth. Lord Mansfield, the 18th century abolitionist and Lord Chief Justice, is claimed to have said that the air of England is too pure for any slave to breathe, and that as soon as a person set foot on English soil, he or she became free. There is a great deal to be proud of in our common law, which valued personal freedom and individual justice so highly. 100 years after the Norman conquest, in 1166, perhaps the most tyrannical king that ever ruled England, John Lackland, came to the throne. A. Milne so joyously reminds us that King John was not a good man. He had his little ways, and sometimes no one spoke to him for days and days and days. It's interesting to note that no king or prince or family member of the royals since has been named John. John ruled using the principle of vis et voluntas, or force and will, taking executive and sometimes arbitrary decisions, often justified on the basis that a king was above the law, and he tried to form allegiances with continental powers to help him impose his rule. Many contemporary writers were adamant that monarchs should rule in accordance with English custom and law, guided by the advice of the leading members of the realm, the Norman barons. But there was no model for what should happen if a king refused to do so. This led to the rebellious barons forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, a monumental act which celebrated its 800th anniversary last year in 2015. Here's the Magna Carta, or at least a piece from it. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any other way. Nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. From this comes some of our most important freedoms. Habeas corpus, no detention without evidence or trial, and the assumption of innocence until proven guilty, and also our jury system of trials for the most serious offences. These things the EU arrest warrant actually threatens, and makes it incompatible with traditional British law. The Great Charter also enshrined the principle that kings were subject to the laws of the land, and they could not wield arbitrary power, but must respect the customs and laws of the people. This was a direct challenge to the continental system, where power was top-down, imposed on the people, supported by the doctrine of the divine right of kings. Unfortunately, Magna Carta did not settle the matter, and for the next 4 centuries the struggles between two opposing visions of sovereignty continued. On the one hand, the parliamentarians, who believed that the king should be subject to the will of the people through a representative parliament, and on the other, the royalists, who believed in the divine right of kings to exercise absolute power. This led by the middle of the 17th century to the English Civil War, which resulted in the execution of Charles I, an extraordinary demonstration of the assertion of parliamentary sovereignty. For a time, prior to the restoration of the monarchy, England was subjected to the self-appointed rule of Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protectorate. Constitutionally, the wars established the precedent that an English monarch cannot govern without Parliament's consent, although the idea of Parliament as the ruling power of England was only formally established during the Glorious Revolution of 1688 with the overthrow of King James II. The Glorious Revolution ended with the closest thing we have to a written constitution, the Bill of Rights. Many people know that the USA has a Bill of Rights, but they don't know that we do. Indeed, the Americans base theirs on ours. Our Bill of Rights has a great place in the history and constitution of England, re-emphasising Magna Carta, the primacy of Parliament, and forever limiting the power of the monarchy. What makes it so special is that it was created by the people at a time when there was no monarch on the throne, through a nationwide consultation of parish meetings, a truly democratic statement, if ever there was one. Here we see a quote from the Bill of Rights, celebrated last year on a stamp marking 800 years of Magna Carta. So successful was Britain under its common law system that it has ensured our prosperity and liberty ever since. Our ancient democratic instinct and willingness to fight for our freedoms has ensured that Britain has never produced a dictator, nor ever elected an extremist candidate to Parliament. What is more, we exported this system around the world. If I ask you to name countries most like England, USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand would trip off the tongue. This is a map of common law countries around the world, and those in dark blue, you will see, are our closest allies, sharing cultural habits, language, customs and laws with us. Many of these are Commonwealth countries, which after British occupation voluntarily retained common law administrations as they recognised how these systems protected their freedoms and ensured good governance. Indeed, this bond of kinship was so great that during the Second World War, thousands came to fight for us, of their own free will, without being drafted. Democratically, they are far more like us than any country in Europe. Indeed, in the wake of the 2004 tsunami, the American Navy reported that they found working with India and Australia much easier than working with the Europeans. The US is now keen to work closer with the Indian Navy. It has been pointed out that whilst Magna Carta crossed the oceans, it never crossed the Channel. So we are fundamentally different in our outlook to our European neighbours, whose legal systems are based on Roman law. At the risk of oversimplification, but I believe in the true spirit of the matter, what this difference boils down to is that whilst common law protects the people from the state, Roman law protects the state from the people. So to finish, I'd like to read you Boudica's speech to her warriors, AD 61, when they were faced with Roman domination. You have learned by actual experience how different freedom is from slavery. Hence, although some among you may previously, through ignorance of which was better, have been deceived by the alluring promise of the Romans, yet now that you have tried both, you have learned how great a mistake you made in preferring an imported despotism to your ancestral mode of life, and you have come to realise how much better is poverty with no master than wealth with slavery.